Hi guys. So, waiting for the bus and it's absolutely freezing, but let's get into it. Today you and I are going to talk about commits and the size of commits, and I'll share something that happens to me on a quite regular basis, and hopefully I will persuade you now to do what I think you should do and not what I actually do, because I'm absolutely horrible at this. But let's get to it. So I'll start you off with a story. At my first company, I basically worked independently on a salary management system. And at the time, and I mean, I'm still not a Git expert in any way, and if you don't know what Git is, I highly recommend that you have a look at that. It's a very, very fundamental part of being a professional programmer. It's basically version control, and that's another fancy word that you may not know, but think of it as saving code. Let's just end it there, because that Git deserves its entire own tutorial and like its own video. But I was working at this company, and I had been working for roughly, let's say, a week locally. And because, I had just been churning away code, writing tons and tons of unit tests, and virtually what happened was that me, in my stupidity, I accidentally break said code. And I run a script that virtually takes all of the stuff that I made and it turns it absolutely upside down. Like it completely destroys all of my code. Now, for those of you who are using Git, this may not be much of a problem to you, because you're thinking, all right, cool, I'll just revert back to the previous version of the code. No harm, no foul. But since I am a stupid person, I have not committed my code in 2 weeks. Because that's how long I spent working on that feature. Yeah. So that basically meant that 2 weeks of work was just gone. And, as a side note, which could be pretty, well, I suppose, interesting or useful for you, is to know that the only thing that survived my destructive script were my unit tests. And I had full coverage. So thanks to those unit tests, I could simply run my unit tests and see that they were all failing and start implementing the code all over again. Now, as you probably know if you've been doing this for a while, the first implementation of something takes like 10 times as long as the second one. Like, I remember an old project that took me 3 weeks to hand in, and I destroyed it basically a few days before I was supposed to hand it in. I rewrote the whole thing in 3 hours because I already knew where I was going with it. So what I learned from this was that committing often is actually it's an extremely important thing to do. You need to save your code ideally as soon as you finish it's a tricky thing. It's a little bit of a experience thing, but I find that the best time to commit your code is when you finish a module of a feature. So if let's take a React situation or an Angular situation or something like that, you created a component. The component is now finished. It's done. It doesn't mean that the whole thing is done. Just one component is done. Save your code. Each component, save your code. Each library, save your code. Each finished class, save your code. And you don't have to push it necessarily, just save it. Save it. For the love of God, save it. Because the thing is that two things happens when you get really, really big commits, which is the case that, I was in. First and foremost, you put yourself in a lot of risk, because if you're not committing your code in a very frequent manner, odds are that, as I was saying, something could happen with that code and all of a sudden all that work is gone, which is not fun at all, especially not when you've been working for 2 weeks. And the second thing that happens is that you get sloppy. You get really, really sloppy. And you do that because the thing is that especially in JavaScript, I mean, I don't know how many times I've pushed code that has the wrong class name on an element, so that the CSS and the styling, it looks completely broken. And CSS is notoriously difficult to test. It's virtually impossible to test CSS, and in an effective manner. So there I am, looking at my giant commit that has like maybe 10, 20, 30 files that have changed. When I'm committing that code, depending on my mood, if I'm really energetic, maybe I'll go through all of them, but I'm gonna skim them because it's too much in one go. It's like having a too big of a piece of food to chew. Like you can't deal with it all at the same time. You have to slice it up in order for it to be effective, right? So when you have all those files, what you're most likely going to do what I do. You just skim through. You just skim. I mean, how many times have you read the I accept agreement? No, nobody does that. Everybody clicks I accept, right? And it's the same principle here. So my tip to you, trust me, I am sucky at this. I know I am, and I try to remember it as much as humanly possible. Save often. Just trust me, save often.